With Hassan Khannenje. He is the director of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, a research and policy think tank. Thank you for being with us on the program. The RSF is saying that they have control now over Mabsouta and Babanousa, both claims that the army denies. Talk to us a bit about the strategic importance of both of these towns and what it means if indeed the RSF has full control over it.
I think despite the defiant talk coming from al-Burhan, the leader of SAF, the fall of Babanousa is a massive blow, not just to the fortunes of SAF, but potentially it closes off West Sudan and opens, a new corridor into Kordofan region, which brings it closer to actually Khartoum. Secondly, it is an important critical point, choke point for both arms supplies as well as humanitarian supplies. And so it is going to have a massive impact, not just on the fighting parties, but also on the possibilities of humanitarian interventions to help people who desperately need it. And so this is a big, change in the conflict theater. But also diplomatically, I think it is moving to give a lot more legitimacy to arguments presented by the RSF, as opposed to the previous legitimacy or relative legitimacy that had been enjoyed by SAF following the recapture of Khartoum. Now, this poses potentially cataclysmic, change on the theater, in part because I think both parties are going to be determined either to advance or to retake some of those parts in a bid to contain the losses, but also to enhance their negotiating capacity, especially in the light of increasingly balkanized country, but also an increasingly balkanized mediation efforts that have been trying to actually bring the parties together. And so this, in essence and in summary, is a massive blow to SAF, but also is a huge momentum booster for RSF. And so I think the future is still going to be bleak, both the humanitarian as well as the peace and stability of Sudan.
Right, you're saying that this is going to motivate the RSF to further advance, as Babanousa does give them access to a completely new corridor that leads them to the capital. What would it mean if the RSF takes full control of the capital and it seizes it?
What that will mean is RSF is going to become the government of Sudan. Of course, it's still going to face resistance, and there's still going to be a semblance of civil war going on. But if effectively, for them to recapture Khartoum, considering they've recaptured a lot of parts that are critical to the operations in Sudan, effectively they're going to become the de facto government of Sudan.
You mentioned this development being painting a very bleak picture on the humanitarian front. I mean, we've seen reports after reports from NGOs detailing the crises that the Sudanese have been facing for years now. What does that bleak picture look like in your view?
We're talking about potentially millions of people facing starvation, not to mention hundreds of thousands have already faced, rape, have faced extreme human rights violations. And to the extent that the international community is right now poorly equipped to actually urgently take humanitarian action in there, I think the future is not looking very good. And that is, I think, the worrying trend, because even as RSF advances, the kind of noise we hear coming from the ground is there are a lot of human rights violations at a time when there is limited access in terms of humanitarian support and humanitarian relief to communities and populations that have suffered for the better part of the last 3 years.
Indeed, and I want to ask you to shed some light on, because we often talk about the war in Sudan to be a civil war, but of course we know that there is international support that these groups receive, including the retrieval of arms from the RSF. Can you shed some light on how they're receiving this support and how consistent it has been?
The conflict in Sudan would actually have ended year one if it were not for the international support they're receiving, both from Sudan's near abroad, Gulf countries, as well as countries in Europe. And that is what has fueled and made the conflict intractable. Of course, to the extent that both fighting forces control certain passageways externally, it has made it possible for them to resupply either by air or sometimes by road. And of course, Sudan is a country that neighbors, seven other countries. It makes it easy for actually arms to be able to be transported, considering that the country right now is almost effectively split into half. And so it is not too difficult to actually get arms in there. Now, the capture of Khartoum, for instance, may deny then the Sudanese armed forces some of the privileges it has had in terms of access. And that is why we are saying if RSF were to capture Khartoum, effectively, it's going to become the government of Sudan.
Okay, Hassan Khannenje, thank you so much for being with us here on the NewsHour and sharing that analysis with us.
Thanks for having me.